question, but how do I make this play
in the upper right-hand corner, there should be something that says percent.
There it is. Alrighty.
I have an obligation I forgot about.
Just let me know.
I actually can compute that.
When you want to like go next slide, just say next slide and I'll take it on for you, okay?
Okay, thanks.
And I'm gonna go mute and let you present, okay?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel. The nice and accurate history of queer coding Ineffable Husbands. I apologize for any strangeness that might happen. I am currently hiding in my break room at work. So, you can, next slide. So I'm Leo. I'm 21 years old. My pronouns are he, him. I cosplay as Crowley, but I'm more of an Aziraphale type. And my Twitter is Nerd with the Dog if you want to follow me after the panel. So next slide. So today we're going to be talking about queer coding and how it affects how people interpret Crowley and Aziraphale. So obviously we have to start by having a basic discussion of what queer coding is. According to the Wikipedia, queer coding is the subtextual portrayal of a queer character in the media whose identity is not explicitly confirmed within canon. The concept refers to a character that encapsulates what might be considered queer traits that are recognizable to the audience, but never labeled or claimed by the content creator. So basically what it's saying is that the character seems to be LGBTQ+, but it's never explicitly stated within canon what that character's sexuality is. So next slide. So queer coding is not queer baiting. They can go hand in hand with each other, but they are not the same thing. Queer baiting is a marketing technique for fiction and entertainment creators hint at, but do not ever explicitly depict same-sex romance or other LGBTQ+ representation. Again, short version of that is they use queer coding as a way to bait audience, to specifically target to LGBTQ+ audiences. So next slide. So we have to talk about the basic history of why queer coding came to be. In the 1930s, movies had the motion picture code production put into place, and to basically summarize, the two bylaws that explicitly say that LGBTQ+ people aren't supposed to be in movies. No picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who've seen it. Hence, the sympathies of the audience should never be towards the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. And based on the time period and the use of the word sin, we can obviously infer that they mean LGBTQ+ peoples. And the sanctity of the Institute of Marriage and Home shall be upheld. Pictures shall not infer low forms of sex relationships are accepted or common thing. Basically stating that LGBTQ+ people are a lower form of relationship. And then we also have to talk about the Comics Code Association, because Neil Gaiman himself was working on Sandman around the time Good Omens came out, and the Comics Code Association was a censorship bureau that policed comic books and explicitly banned sexual perversion or inference of the same, which most scholars believe is a clear reference to homosexuality. So keeping in mind that Neil Gaiman was probably working on Good Omens around the same time as he was working on Sandman when the Comics Code Association was still around, it probably had an influence on how he wanted to portray Crowley and Aziraphale. Next slide. And then, while there was never explicitly a association to put a ban on LGBTQ plus people in books, there is a extensive list of books currently in the year 2020 that are banned for having LGBTQ plus characters, including Antango Makes 3, which is about the famous New York Zoo gay penguins raising their child, Angels in America, which is about the AIDS crisis, and if anyone's interested in the link to the banned books, let me know in the Q&A section and I can post it or make it available. Next slide. Sorry, the famous Vine, and they were roommates. So there are some examples of queer coding. Some are obviously stereotypes like the effeminate man or the masculine woman or the unmarried childless old person or the deceptive transgender person. So these obviously come from stereotypes, which are range from true to dangerous. And then some examples come from the LGBTQ plus community itself. Green carnations were a symbol created by Oscar Wilde for gay people to say, hey, I'm gay. The black ring on the middle finger is commonly associated with asexuality. Inclusion of popular media within the LGBTQ plus community, Panic at the Disco, which is seen in both Love, Simon and Alex Strangelove as Brendan Urie being their Maybe I'm Gay awakening, Queen, musicals, and other forms of media that are popular within the community. Throwing it back to around the Vietnam War, even earlier, is the question, are you a friend of Dorothy? Which many militaries spent millions of dollars trying to figure out who this Dorothy woman was. And then oftentimes queer coded characters will deal with feelings of being ostracized, abandoned, or being out of place. So next slide. To talk more specifically about Crowley and Aziraphale, some of the story beats that they follow is Crowley and Aziraphale never quite fit in anywhere, and they feel out of place in both heaven and hell, and they feel they cannot be their true selves in the communities they were born into or created into. Crowley's love of Queen is definitely a form of, it could be considered a form of queer coding. Crowley and Aziraphale being unconventionally masculine, including Crowley being a female presenting nanny for many years. And then their arc together is definitely romance coded with their awkward first meetings, settling into their relationship, breaking up, and then reconciliation. Many people, and then a quote from the book itself, many people meeting Aziraphale for the first time formed 3 impressions of Aziraphale: that he was gay, that he was intelligent, and that he was gayer than a tree full of monkeys on nitrous oxide, which gay obviously could imply to being eccentric, could just be mean eccentric, but even at the time that Good Omens was released around the 1990s, using gay as a descriptor of anything other than sexuality was not as common as it used to be. Next slide. So we do kind of have confirmation from Neil Gaiman himself that Crowley and Aziraphale are in love. He said on Twitter, I want to exclude the idea they're ace or aromantic or trans. They are an angel and a demon, not as make humans, per the book. Occult ethereal beings don't have sexes something we tried to reflect in the casting. Whatever Crowley and Aziraphale are, it's a love story. So next slide. So before we kind of come to the conclusion, the question would be, why queer code over explicitly having the two characters? It might have been to protect the book from being censorship or being outright banned. Obviously, we know how Neil Gaiman feels about Crowley and Aziraphale's relationship, but we will never know how Terry Pratchett feels. So some of the queer coding might have come from one of them writing them as platonically and one of them writing them as romantically. And then, the other reason they might have chose queer code, if it was intentional, is to allow for fan interpretation. There's nothing wrong with fan interpretation, especially for LGBTQ plus characters, as people can project their own stories onto the characters. So next slide. So the Crowley and Aziraphale aren't human, so applying human ideas of gender, sexuality, romance may not be proper. However, next slide. They do love each other, and whether that is platonic or romantic is up to the individual person's interpretation of their relationship. Neither one is wrong, because we are applying abstract concepts to abstract beings. So whether you interpret them as being romantically in love with each other, which is a valid interpretation, or platonically in love with each other, which is also valid, or having the form of love that the Greeks called agape, which is the love between a god and their people, or somebody and their fellow man, is also a valid interpretation. They love each other, regardless of what type of love that is. And that is the end of the formal presentation. So we are open for questions now. So yes, I will definitely, I believe the two people asking questions follow me on Twitter now. I will be posting the link on my Twitter for sure. And this is a list specifically that I found for books that are banned in America, but I would be more than happy to go digging around for links to books that are banned worldwide that are because of the LGBTQ plus representation in them. Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, and this is our lovely co-host, Caspin. Oh, we got another one from the chat. Hello from the panel.
There is oh, go ahead.
So we got a question. Although from the panel yesterday, it was unclear as to Neil meant he wrote a love story both in the book and the TV show, or just the latter. Of course, it came across as much more clearly in the series. Yes, I believe that was the TV show being more clear was intentional, from what I read. Pardon the background noise. But the Neil Gaiman has said that he wrote the show to more intentionally reflect Crowley and Aziraphale being in love with each other, because it is more unclear in the book. So thoughts?
I was just going to say, I know that at one point Neil actually did say that the book was not written as a love story. I don't think that that necessarily means there wasn't a love story in there, or that there wasn't love between Aziraphale and Crowley in there. But he said that the TV series was an intentional love story and written that way. And so there was a little bit of difference between the two.
Badger asks, what do you think about the hand-holding situation? Does that come into the realm of queer baiting? Neil tweeted about them holding hands, asking for us to look, but it's off screen. I don't think it comes in. Again, we're projecting the ideas of human love onto ethereal beings. It seems like a cop-out, but affection between two men or male presenting characters changes depending on context and the in the country. So Crowley and Aziraphale have been around for 6,000 plus years. So for them, hand holding might not be as a form of romantic affection as we see it now. But since it wasn't used in the context of advertising towards the LGBTQ plus community, it was just something Neil had said offhanded on Twitter. I don't think it necessarily falls into the realm of queer baiting. Not a question, but you're thank you, Badger. Any other examples of queer coding you could talk about? I could talk about queer all day, because even if we touch outside of the realm of good omens and look into media in general, sometimes queer characters will end up taking like the father role of the group, but not have any romantic interest within the show. You know, and then obviously Crowley is kind of especially in the show, non-binary or gender fluid coded, in the fact that the way he dresses is more androgynous, and he does spend time kind of flipping back and forth between being more masculine presenting and feminine presenting during his time as a nanny for Warlock. Question: when you say banned books in America, do you mean nationally banned? It's both. It's both nationally banned. They can both be nationally banned and school specific banned. I think most of these books are regionally banned. So to just kind of explain how America is divided up, the East Coast and West Coast are kind of more open and accepting towards LGBTQ plus people, while the middle section is kind of hit or miss. So some of these books are banned more in southern states like Texas and Arkansas and Alabama, while it may be people up in the north may not bat an eye at books like And Tango Makes Three being out. Can you elaborate a bit on queer coding, especially on queer coding not being harmful while queer baiting clearly is? So queer coding is not harmful in the way queer baiting is. Queer baiting is specifically getting the LGBTQ plus community to buy something under the idea that there is LGBTQ plus representation. Pre the last season, Voltron is an example of that, because the show was on and off like, oh, Lance, Keith are gay for each other, but they're not, but they are, but they're not, but they are, to try to keep the LGBTQ plus community interested in Voltron, while never actually giving representation until the very end, where they pulled the bury your gay trope. And queer coding is not necessarily harmful because they may not. Queer coding and queer baiting are about intentionality. Queer coding may be accidentally implied with, and as long as the show is not selling the idea of an LGBTQ plus character being in it, that's when it falls into the realm of queer coding and not queer baiting. I hope this is not too controversial, but Sherlock, original Sherlock by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Do you think Sherlock and John are queer coded? If you'd rather not go into it, this is okay. I understand, obviously. So the original so again, this is the problem with Crowley and Aziraphale, is we are looking at the original Sir Arthur Conan Doyle books with modern lenses. So our understanding of what it means to be LGBT is different than when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was writing. He was definitely writing in a time where male friendships were more affectionate with each other. So I think it's valid to read even back in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's original books that John and Sherlock are queer coded, but I wouldn't say that was his intention when writing. Wouldn't say it's necessarily his intention when writing the characters. What's your favorite example of queer coding, either from Good Omens or another fandom? Thank you for the compliment. So honestly, I love it. I love it when Brendan Urie and Panic at the Disco get brought up. It's a problem. I love Panic at the Disco. I know Brendan Urie's gotten into some controversy lately, but I do greatly appreciate that even before Brendan Urie came out as pansexual, there were movies and TV shows where the characters are like, Brendan Urie is hot. I might be gay. May or may not have had my trans awakening when I was at Panic at the Disco concert, looked at Brendan Urie and I'm like, I want to be that. This sounds a lot more banned, as in more like they are not sold in bookstores, not in libraries, especially school libraries. They are not illegal to have. Yes, it's more like they are not sold in bookstores or libraries rather than illegal. In the United States, we don't have nationwide censorship usually, unless it's extreme. We don't usually nationally ban stuff. Given current circumstances here in the United States, in another 4 years that might change, but as of right now, we do not have national bans on books usually. Do you have recommendations for those who want to read more? I'm mastering. Oh, hey, that's cool that you have masters in queer history. I so I I got a lot of the idea for this panel from a YouTube series called Are They Gay? The creator of it especially did a particular episode on Good Omens, and he has a running series where he's been breaking down LGBT history decade by decade. And if you want to follow me on Twitter at Nerd with a Dog, sorry to plug it, but I can send you the books that I've been reading. There's a book called Queer in There and Everywhere that covers some major historical figures of the LGBT community throughout the years. I would also recommend Cleve Jones's book, When We Rise. He lived through a lot of major events in LGBTQ plus history, and he's still alive today. He's a political activist and LGBTQ plus rights activist. Great guy. very smart historian himself. Just also happens to be part of major historical events. So definitely, and I will definitely be posting some and there are some fun books that I've read, Bingo Love, that kind of, it's not based on a true story, but it takes place and is kind of accurate towards how LGBTQ relationships were dealt with in the 20s through the early 2000s. Is queer coding internationally understood, or are there different manifestations according to different cultures? I do believe there are. So yes, queer coding is different depending on culture, for sure. It's if we're talking more American Eurocentric, there seems to be more commonalities in queer coding for characters than, say, in anime, which might be different. For example, some queer coding in anime that I've noticed that isn't explicit here in the in more Eurocentric media is a lot of the characters that are LGBT without falling into yaoi seem to talk about Shakespeare a lot. I don't know if that's just a me thing, me picking that up, or if it's like actually a difference between Eurocentric queer coding and non-Eurocentric queer coding. But I digress. I do believe there are differences according to different cultures. Is queer baiting the same as pinkwashing? Also, thank you. Queer baiting, actually, sadly, I haven't heard the term pinkwash. Oh wait, nope, I know what you mean by pinkwashing. Never mind. I no, I'm gonna say no on this, because queer bait. Actually, I'm gonna say it depends, because queer baiting is selling based on the idea that maybe this character is LGBT. Pinkwashing is taking an LGBTQ plus character or historical figure and making them straight or straight presenting. So yes and no, because if they did the imitation game and made Alan Turing straight, but people went there because they were like, oh, LGBT historical figure, and they were pushing, oh yes, this historical figure is LGBT, but never explicitly touched on his sexuality, then yes. But if they never touch in any form on the advertising that this person was LGBT, then no. Did you personally feel that there were any queer baiting in specific scenes in the show or the book? If they were isolated, if you were to isolate those scenes and not brought it, so if the whole show didn't take story beats of a love story, yes. Like if Crowley was just, well, Crowley and Aziraphale was implied to be interested in a woman, then I would, out of context, yes, these seem, especially the breakup. If the breakup in the bandstand was in any other context, yes. But if the show had not played out the way it was, but they still had the breakup in the bandstand, absolutely, I would be having a completely different opinion right now, and I'd be like, this is queer baiting. This is not good. One of my coworkers just came in and checked on me because I'm talking in a corner talking to myself. But if the bandstand had happened in say, I don't know, if the bandstand scene had happened in, say, Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman's version of Sherlock, absolutely, that would be queer baiting to the maximum if that show wasn't already slightly queer baiting enough. But since it happened in the context of Crowley and Aziraphale's relationship in Good Omens in the show, I wouldn't. It's not queer baiting, but isolated, absolutely. In the past 20 years, there's been a steady increase of representation of non-mainstream sexualities, like popular shows. Thoughts of how that may be helping change the views of heterosexuals, especially young folks watching. Oh, yes. So, I'm only 21. So I haven't been there for the total evolution of media, but even in the past 5 or 6 years, I've noticed a change in non-mainstream sexualities being represented in media. For example, my friend and I were watching Kipo and the Wonder Beasts, and you know, they tried straight baiting and it didn't work. And I really do think it's been helping the cis heterosexual population understand LGBTQ plus people, that they are just another person that they could possibly know. I know I was listening to somebody talk about, there was a cis heterosexual woman talking about Ellen DeGeneres is coming out on her TV show. While Ellen DeGeneres is not the queer icon she used to be, you know, this woman was just like, I guess I never realized that LGBTQ plus people, especially lesbians, were just a part of everyday life. And when my daughter came out, having already had that person, having already heard Ellen's story, I understood better what she might be going through. So yes, I do think the inclusion of LGBTQ plus people in mainstream media has helped the regular cis heterosexual population understand the LGBTQ plus community a little bit better. Isaac Newton did a total OMG. They're roommates. Yeah. So, for context of how this panel came about, I watched Good Omens with my parents. Good call there, me. But my dad had originally read the book, and he was just like, the book was really good. I've heard really good things about the show. And he looked at me and he's just like, I think you'd really like the show. And I'm like, okay. So we watched the show together, and at the end of it, my dad was just like, oh, they're such good friends. They're so good for each other. They're such lovely friends. And my mom, who every time we watched a show and a character is not explicitly LGBT, has just been like, you're reading too much into it. But at the end of Good Omens, she was just like, oh my God, they are so gay for each other. They are so gay for each other. And I'm like, ooh. And my dad's just like, you're just reading too much into it. And my mom was just like, dear, did you hear the song they played at the end of it? They played a love song while they were at the Ritz together. It's gay. And my dad is just like, and I'm just like, oh my God. So yeah. Are there any books or articles you can rec that speak clearly of the vocabulary used currently for all phases and positions of LGBTQ plus community? Language seems to change so quickly and it's hard to keep up. I know people within the community and myself have trouble keeping up with the vocabulary. Thank you. Normally I don't recommend Urban Dictionary, but I say Urban Dictionary is a good place to kind of peruse about it. And I know I am only 21 years old, and I'm on social media all the, like, my life outside of work and school revolves around social media, and I can't even keep up with the changing terminology that we have sometimes. So I it is going to be difficult to keep up. And so the other, I wouldn't say it's an issue, but the other thing is people's understanding of the definitions within the community are definitely up to the individual. For example, one of my friends came out as omnisexual, which I had been using as a catch-all term for people who are attracted to multiple genders. But she was using it as a way of saying, I am pansexual with a preference, is how she was using it. And so it is hard to keep up with definitions because it is a very personal personal thing with definitions. Like for some people, gender fluid is basically, oh, thank you. Thank you, mods. We've got 10 minutes, so if you have any other questions, please let us know. And but I will keep on this topic of phrases and terms. So yeah, the vocabulary is always going to change, and the vocabulary will change depending on person to person. For some people, if they're gender fluid with gender fluid, even if they have a preference, is even if they have a gender they more so identify with, they're still gender fluid. But some people who are would previously have been categorized as gender fluid may identify as demi boy or demi girl if they identify more with male or female aligned genders. Academies have gone more with the term queer history for an umbrella term of LGBTQ plus people's histories. Yeah, I've noticed that with one of my professors has worked with LGBTQ plus history in Brazil. He's an anthropologist, so I will be putting I will plug his book on Twitter. He works with Brazil, and he has said LGBTQ plus history. Actually, I will have to dig through that class, and I will definitely be posting some of the articles about LGBTQ plus history. The class I took with him definitely shaped how I understand Crowley and Aziraphale's relationship, because we do have a tendency of looking at things with a modern perspective, which can be problems, and anthropomorphizing animals. For example, he was talking about bonobos, which is our closest living ancestor, and how people kind of anthropomorphize them and say, oh, they are gay, when gay is an identity that humans have created, whereas bonobos do have sexual relationships with each other, but they wouldn't have the concept of sexuality. So yes, yes, queer history. Actually, October is Queer History Month, so yeah, I have definitely seen queer history as a umbrella term for LGBTQ plus people's history. And admittedly, my understanding of LGBTQ plus history is definitely not even Eurocentric, but it's American centric, and even what I would consider Stonewall centric, because most when it's taught in the United States, LGBTQ plus history definitely goes from Stonewall forward, rather than talking about the time beforehand. And I do blame it on the idea that America wants to seem more progressive than we actually are, that we fixed our homophobia, that we fixed homophobia by saying Stonewall, and then everything got bigger, or everything got better. This is the biggest subject in queer history, of putting modern labels on non-modern people. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's an interesting debate to have with scholars, because it's an interesting debate to have with other people who study queer history. While it's not my field of study, I do try to take classes where I can on the subject, and it is a very interesting debate to have, because, like I was saying earlier when talking about labels and in our vernacular, as a community, it does change. It's constantly in flux, and that's the beautiful and frustrating thing about this community, is that our understanding of gender and sexuality is always in flux. So if we're talking about the ancient Romans, a male who had exclusively sexual relations with a male may not have been seen as a homosexual man. Hey, that's cool. Yeah, so like an ancient Roman man who exclusively had relations with other men, may, if he was in the modern context, may be people may say, oh, he's gay. But taking into context that Roman man was a military man automatically changes that in the context of Roman times, because this man may have just been seen as a good soldier bonding with his fellow man and getting manly because he's having sex with his fellow man, because that was the manliest thing you could do in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, is have sex with your fellow man, but not be a lesbian. Don't have sex. Women better not be having sex with other women. So yes, the historical context is key to how we label historical figures. I know in the book Queer in There and Everywhere, they don't explicitly say Joan of Arc was trans, but they do make a case that she was gender nonconforming and may be an early example of a trans or non-binary person. But yes, that is very interesting, studying medieval Europe in LGBTQ plus people, especially with the rise of Catholicism, and some of what we understand of ancient sexuality is definitely affected by the takeover of Catholicism, in that these sexual relationships that ancient men and women were having with each other definitely got erased by Christian and Catholic missionaries. Even mythology, it took us forever to realize that Apollo was not a straight god, and that he had sexual relationships with both men and women, and that it was actually pretty common for the gods to have sexual relationships with men and women. I haven't personally heard of Zeus having relationship. Actually, that's not true. He did have relations with a male servant of his. Also, we've got 3 minutes left in the panel. So any other questions? I will wrap this up before any other questions before I wrap this up? No? Okay. Oh, I followed you on Twitter. Okay, awesome. I will either tweet or PM you information. Thank you. thank you all for coming to this panel. I'm so glad you can make it, and I'm so glad people were interested in my rambling. Speaking of gods and gender, Loki, oh my god, that god is a mess. That god is a mess. And also, fun fact, in more recent Marvel comics, Loki in the comics has taken on more gender fluid identity, more of a gender fluid identity, and especially in their time in Young Justice, spent a lot of time flipping back and forth between being male and being female. Welcome to I Know Too Much About Marvel Comics without having read anything other than Civil War. But yes, Loki is definitely a mess. And so wrapping things up, Crowley and Aziraphale love each other. Make sure y'all are kind to each other when talking about LGBTQ plus discourse. And I really appreciate those of you who came today, asked questions, and gave comments. And follow me on Twitter. Tweet me anything that you want to tweet, any questions that I didn't answer or get around to. Oh no, I'm doing a panel right now for a convention. I'm sorry, one of my coworkers just walked in on this. But yes, thank you all for coming. I really do appreciate it. Feel free to have a discourse with me on Twitter. I had one going with Neil Gaiman, or sort of going with Neil Gaiman before the convention. And Alex Hirsch. I have talked to Alex Hirsch on Twitter before. That was interesting. So if you want to see more of me tweeting at celebrities or see more about the context, that is time. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for coming. Bye.